So I'll be talking today, and not just talking. My goal here is to convince you to come down to Belize. And on this talk, I'll give you all the reasons why you need to come down to Belize. But just as a starter and a little teaser right there, these are some of the birds that we get to see on some of our Belize tours. And we call Belize the birding nation because although it's a tiny country, we really have more birders in this tiny country than compared to any of our neighbors. So that's why you'll see the title of my talk is Belize, the Birding Nation. And you'll see on the first screen right here, two of the Yucatan endemics, which we normally see on our birding trips, especially in the northern part of Belize. On the far right, you have a gray-throated chat, one of the Yucatan endemics. Right in the middle, you see a lovely cotinga, which is harder to see, but in the edges of the mountain pine ridge, we do get to see it. And at the top left, you have a rose-throated tanager, that's a male. And just below it, our magnificent orange-breasted falcon. So just some of the teasers of some of the birds that you can see when you come to Belize. Let's talk a little bit about Belize in a nutshell. So first of all, we're a very young country. We got our independence in 1981. Our population is just under 500,000. And this is really one of the beauties about Belize. You never feel like you're in an area that is packed with people. You go even to some of the large cities and it doesn't feel like you are surrounded by too many people. Of course, when you're exploring our national parks or wildlife reserves, you almost have these places to yourself. So with low population, our forests, our protected areas are almost intact. To the north, we have Mexico, really good neighbors. And to the west and to the south, we have Guatemala. So because of this, Spanish is also a major language here in Belize. Size-wise, we are just short of 9,000 square miles, just about the size of Massachusetts, if you want to compare. Our main languages, English is our official language, but it's not the most widely spoken language. We have the Belize Creole, which is our lingua franca. Everybody speaks it. If you were born here in Belize, you can speak Belize Creole. As I mentioned, English is our official language, so that's what you learn at school. But to be honest, here in Belize, you only answer somebody in English if they speak to you in English. Otherwise, it's Creole, Spanish, or one of the other languages. We have three different groups of Maya here in Belize, the Yucatec, the Quechua, and the Mopan. Each of them have their own language, their own dialect. And when it comes to ethnic groups, we have about 11, including Garifuna, which you might have not heard too much about before. We have mestizos, but we also have, we have Mennonites, we have East Indians. So they really call Belize the melting pot of races because we have so many different ethnic groups and we all coexist. We love each other's food, we love each other's culture, and we have managed to really get along really, really well for the past, our short history existing as a country. People often ask, how do you describe Belize? So Belize is part of Central America. We're not a Caribbean island, as many people think, but we have strong Caribbean roots and a British past. And by British past, we mean not that we like tea, but we have a lot of the customs that were rooted from the time that the British were here. So we really are a melting pot of races. We can coexist with so many ethnic groups, and we can all get together really, really well. When you ask us about the people, depending on where you are, one ethnic group might be stronger than other. For example, in the northern part of Belize, you have the mestizo, which are a mix of the Maya and the Spanish. So the photo that you see on the far left of your screen, that's a typical mestizo right there. In the top center part, you have what is a typical Maya community. You can see some of the women cooking there. The men are probably working outside. On the lower central part of the photo, you have the Garifuna. These are, performing some of their cultural dances. We have Creole, the photo on the far right. So you can really see that mix of races It's really hard for you to tell who's a Belizean by just looking at this person. It's impossible to tell if this person is Belizean or not. But if they speak Belize Creole, you know that they were born here. They're Belizeans. So that's the only distinguishing mark. And if, as Philip can also confirm, if you love your rice and beans with stewed chicken and salad, you're definitely Belizean, especially if you add a little bit of the Marie Sharp's hot sauce. But speaking of food, that is also, what is attractive about Belize. You can do a full food tour here in Belize because every little corner has something different. Our national dish is the bigger photo on your screen, the top left, the rice and beans, and we actually cook it with, instead of water, we cook it with coconut milk, and it gives that extra flavor. Some nice ripe fried plantains and the stewed chicken with that red anato color. Then if you go to the lower left, you have the tacos, which is the, Mexican influence. If you've been to Belize, fried jacks, that photo on the lower central part, fried jacks are, what almost identifies us as Belizeans also. If you didn't have fried jacks for breakfast, you didn't have a Belizean breakfast. On the lower right part, you have hudut, which is a garifuna dish. The base is coconut milk, and you usually have fried fish, and you accompany it with cassava bread and a mixture of ripe and green plantains that are mashed together. Ceviche, which is a Caribbean delicacy, and our famous meat pies also on the top right of your screen. All of these really show you how diverse the cuisine is here in Belize. You can't say it's Caribbean, you can't say it's Central American. It's really a blend of all these cultures, and that's what results in our kitchen, right? So most people come to Belize for the birds, but they also fall in love with our food because it's simply delicious. For those of you who have been here to Belize, I'm stirring up a lot of emotions with these photos. You might be remembering that breakfast that you had here or that rice and beans that you had here. So let's talk about our country when it comes to elevation. Belize is, as we mentioned, a small country, and as such, most of the country is very, very low. As you see on this map, all the areas along the coast and most of the northern part of Belize are very flat. That gives ways to a lot of wetlands, a lot of river systems. And then in the central area and going towards the west is where we have some of our higher elevations, like the Maya Mountains, the Mountain Pine Ridge, Victoria Peak, and the Coxcomb area. Those are the only high elevation areas that we have in Belize. We don't even make it to 4,000 feet at our highest point, but we share many of the species that you find in the neighboring countries at higher elevations. We just have that small isolated pocket of high mountains. And of course, everything along the coastal areas is mostly wetlands, brackish lagoons, and we do have some mangrove along our coast as well. Actually, a lot of mangrove along our coast. When it comes to habitats, don't underestimate Belize. Belize is a tiny country, but there are so many different habitats. As I mentioned, we do have coastal savannas. We do have broadleaf forest. In the extreme north of Belize, we have the typical Yucatan dry forest, which also gives way to some of those Yucatan endemics, like the gray-throated chat, the Yucatan jay that we mentioned. But in the central part, we also have slightly higher elevation broadleaf forest. So this is where you start getting a lot of the manakins, a lot of the shrikes, and stuff like that. In the Mountain Pine Ridge in particular, that central pink area right there is a good area for some of the rare raptors. This is where you start getting stuff like black and white hawk eagles, solitary eagles. At the edges, you can get crested eagle. It's really, really good for raptors. Those high elevation areas that are quite open are good for soaring raptors. So in general, a very low-lying country, but with some interesting species in the higher elevations. Of course, once you get out to some of the islands, You still get some of the Yucatan endemics, like the Yucatan vireo, the black catbird. But in the shallow waters around our islands, we also get interesting species like roseate tern, sooty tern, and some of the more pelagic species, right? So we have 6 important bird and biodiversity areas, right? We have, as we mentioned, in the north, we have the Yucatan dry forest. We have the Galanjog area and the Rio Bravo. This area, number 3 right here, the Crooked Tree and the associated wetlands. Crooked Tree is a very important area. It's like the catchment area for all the waters that come down from the mountains. And it kind of stops the flooding in Belize City, because if there were no wetlands in that area, all that water would go directly to Belize City and just submerge it. So Crooked Tree creates a very important habitat, not just for the birds, but it's important for people, because if, with the absence of those wetlands, flooding in Belize City. Then we have, of course, number 6, which is the Maya Mountains and those southern reserves, key biodiversity areas right there with some species that are only found in those areas. So we have over 100 protected areas here in Belize, covering just over 40% of the country. This is only possible with that low population that we have. If we had 1 million people living in Belize or more, the pressure on our protected areas would be much, much bigger. But we're happy right now. It's working with those over 100 protected areas, both terrestrial and marine. We are protecting a good chunk of our forests. I mean, there are not many countries who can boast that they're protecting over 40% as it is in their natural, habitat. So we're very proud of that. So this includes, of course, 67 terrestrial reserves here on the mainland. The photo you're seeing right there is part of the Siboon Forest Reserve. When we want to go see stuff like slate-colored solitaire, shining honey creeper, violet saberwing, and some of the highland species, this is the area that we think. Those higher elevations, beautiful intact forests for miles and miles around us. So 67 terrestrial reserves in Belize, and we're trying to increase that actually. And we also have 21 marine reserves or marine protected areas. Of course, the more famous one is the Great Blue Hole, which everyone wants to go either snorkel or dive at it. I go snorkeling there, but I'm also on the lookout for red-footed boobies, because nearby is a beautiful island called Half Moon Key, and it's the only nesting colony for the red-footed booby here in Belize. But so these protected areas, both marine and terrestrial, are just critical for us to keep having the areas for our birds. This is a photo of Half Moon Key, that beautiful little island that I was talking about. If you look closely, and I'm not sure if you'll be able to see those details, but on the canopy of that forest, you see small little white specks. Those are actually red-footed boobies that are nesting. We have the white phase here in Belize, and those little white dots that you see there are actually the red-footed boobies that are just getting ready to nest. But it's also a great area for, Half Moon Key is the last little island that we have before the open ocean. So this is where a lot of the migratory, warblers, thrushes, tanagers that are coming in from the Caribbean, this is like their only little stopping point. And this is where they'll stop, take a little break before continuing their migration. So it's a key area for migratory birds. But it just happens to be a beautiful island as well. When you're done with your birding, you hit the beach and you relax for the rest of the day. We also have many archaeological reserves. The big temple that you see there is Kana in the Caracol Archaeological Reserve. And that insert on the top left is actually the mosque at Lamanai. But these are, the typical archaeological reserves. The Maya really used the entire country of Belize, including the islands. So there are remains, there are still a lot of reminders that they were all around us, using the same spaces that we are occupying right now. So some of these archaeological wonders we actually visit during birding trips here in Belize. So a lot of people combine their birding with a bit of archaeology because they're also interested in that historical part. But we also have some wonders underground. I mean, this is a photo of one of the caves, many caves that are around Belize. This is actually a very famous one called the ATM cave. ATM, short for Aktun Tunichil Muknal. This was a very important cave. A lot of offerings were done. So an important ceremonial cave here in Belize. Most people who come birding don't visit this one, but it's there. And if you ever do come birding to Belize, just know that it can be an option right there. If you're interested in caves or Maya ceremonies, this is an important one for you to visit. So let's start dissecting this small country. Let's start talking first of all of the two northern districts. The Corozal district is the northernmost district, and then you have the Orange Walk just to the southwest. Both of these districts actually share border with Mexico, both on the mainland but also out at sea. We have the Chetumal Bay right in front of Corozal, and we actually cut that peninsula coming down from Mexico. And it was actually the Maya who dug out a channel for them to get from one side to the other side towards the barrier reef. So that really served as as a line to divide Mexico and Belize, that is currently used as the borderline. But several very important protected areas. Some of them are, for example, the Shipstern Reserve. We have Freshwater Creek Forest Reserve in the Corozal district, but also the Corozal Bay Wildlife Sanctuary, which is very important for some of the shorebirds, but also some of the waders. We have reddish egret, we have roseate spoonbill, we have many herons and egrets nesting in the shallow areas and mangroves along the coastal zones. Coming down to Orange Walk, we have the massive Rio Bravo conservation area. But we also have the Galanjug area and what is now the newly established Belize Maya Forest Trust. It's a massive forest that has some tropical broadleaf forest, but also a little bit of that Yucatan dry forest, which is home to most of the Yucatan endemics that we were mentioning. So what are some of the species that we can find there? We'll talk about those in a little bit. This is a photo of what is a typical Yucatan dry forest. This is as seen from the birding tower at the Shipstern Nature Reserve. It's a low canopy forest that has two main seasons. During the dry season, it will lose a lot of the leaves, pretty much like what happens in fall up in North America. And then during the rainy season, the water forms basically forest lagoons and flooded areas, which give way to a lot of critters, but also a lot of birds that will look for food in the lower areas of the forest. This is a photo of a very unique Maya city called Lamanai, and this is right at the edge of the New River Lagoon, once an important Maya city. This was an important trade route. And the Maya flourished in this area because they had access to water, but they could also farm the other side of the lagoon. One of the important sites around Orange Walk. So some of the species that you find around here, on the left, you have a buff-bellied hummingbird. Now, although you have this species in southern Texas, you notice how different it is from ours. That buff really is buff. I mean, it's almost like a cinnamon colored. We have the beautiful black colored hawk right in the middle. This is a species that is abundant in this area because it loves wetlands. Think of the black colored hawk as our bald eagle. This is after the fish. So wetlands, fish, and you have black colored hawk. Then on the right, you have the beautiful, tiny but beautiful gray-throated chat. This is one of the Yucatan endemics. They love dry areas, especially dry areas that have a lot of vines and dry twigs and sticks. Very hard to have it open for a good photograph like the one shown here. But our good friend Francis Canto managed an amazing photo with just enough patience for this bird to come out into the open. So these species you normally see in northern Belize. But as I mentioned, because there are so many wetlands, the Jabiru stork, which is one of our largest birds in this area, is also, calls that area home. Here in this photo, it's snacking on its favorite food right there. It's a freshwater eel. And then just to the right, you have a pinnated bittern, very close cousin of the American bittern, but it also likes those freshwater lagoons and wetlands. So very cryptic species. It's very hard to see it, but when we are in certain wetlands, we know what to look for. Just like, you know where to look for an American bittern. But a few others, these are all Yucatan endemics. We have the Yucatan purwheel. When we do night walks or night drives, we're always looking for the Yucatan purwheel because it's one of those nightjars that are out there, but they can be really quiet, really stealthy, but that eye shine really gives them away. In the middle, you have a Yucatan jay, of course, another endemic. And then we have the rose-throated tanager, beautiful tanager found in those northern dry forests. We can't miss out on the ocellated turkey. So for example, when we go into areas like La Milpa or areas around Chanchich, the Belize Maya forest, that's a species that is rather common in those reserves or those forests because they're protected areas. This is a species that is hunted here in Belize, but thankfully, because of those reserves that we have and enough habitat for them in those reserves, they're still abundant in those areas. So if you visit Belize and you go to La Milpa, actually the upcoming ABA tour takes us into that area. So once you're around La Milpa, this ocellated turkey is one that is usually around the cabins or around the compound, just looking for those grasses that have seeds. And then on the top right, we have a green honey creeper. This is another species that can be found around La Milpa and the Maya forest. They love oranges, so there's a small feeder at La Milpa, and they will come to it. And then on the lower right, you have a gray-headed tanager. That's one of the species that will follow ant swarms or found inside forests. So that's one that we always look for in that area. Let's talk a little bit about that central area now. We're a little bit south of Orange Walk and Corozal. We're including now the Belize district and the Cayo district. This is like the central part of Belize. And we have a mix of different habitats here, of course. We have these higher mountains, as I had mentioned, where raptors and, well, some of the rare raptors actually enjoy the area because with all the warm air coming off these slopes, they can spend less time flopping and more time just gliding with all that warm air. But this is where we have the higher elevation hills and mountains. But we also have some very interesting topography. This is a photograph of the natural arch. In this case, this is all limestone giving way to broadleaf forest. But the water, that river, the Chiquibul River, carved underneath that, or carved into the limestone, giving way to that natural bridge. Once you're walking on top of it, you don't really realize what's happening below you. You don't realize that you're on a natural bridge right there because it's surrounded by forest. But this is an area where we go looking, for example, for plain ant vireo, crested owl. We go looking for scarlet macaws, and even some of the rarer raptors like the crested eagle and black and white hawk eagle. So of course, as I mentioned in this area, the orange-breasted falcon is actually a big target around here, especially in the mountain pine ridge. One of those raptors, one of the rarest falcons in the world, but it's just a beautiful one. So many people visiting Belize are after this one because it's very rare in its range. It occurs in Belize, in Guatemala, few records in Panama, and then in South America, it's just, one here, one there. So it's quite a rare species. So a lot of people target it here in Belize because it's easier to see it here. In some of those higher hills, shining honey creeper, like the one on the top left, top right, sorry. And then, of course, the beautiful Agami heron. When we are around some of the wetlands around Crooked Tree in the Belize district, this is a very high target. When we are staying at Crooked Tree, the boat rides normally go to areas where we can find these because everybody wants to see the Agami heron. It's just a very beautiful, very colorful heron, not your typical heron. As I mentioned, scarlet macaws. Uh, when we visit the areas around Chiquibul, Caracol, and maybe the southern edges of the mountain pine ridge, we're able to see them. Of course, the northern emerald toucanet also like higher elevations or mid elevations and intact forest. The elegant euphonium, we're always on the lookout for this beautiful species, very colorful, but easy to miss because they're usually up in the canopy looking for mistletoe fruits and spreading them, of course. Some of the rare raptors that I mentioned, black and white hawk eagle on the left. This is a species that really likes pristine forest. So you won't find it in areas around farmland, really. It prefers nice broadleaf forest where it can hunt. The ultra rare solitary eagle, mostly seen around the mountain pine ridge and the edges, occasionally outside of those areas. But we still have a chance for this around mountain pine ridge. It just really, look at how broad the wings are. That means it will use every bit of warm air under its wings to just soar. It can soar for hours using those very broad wings. A few of the other species that we can find around here, yellow-winged tanager. They love even backyards. Any backyard with a tree that has small berries, and they'll be there. But of course, around the forest trails, we can find them. Up in the mountain pine ridge, we can also look for the rufous-capped warbler, the one on the lower left, and the beautiful Stygian owl. Look at those eyes. I mean, it's just asking you, why are you not in Belize looking at me? So we have a chance for this species up in the mountain pine ridge. Moving on now to the southern part of Belize, we have the Stan Creek district and we have the Toledo district, the two southernmost districts here in Belize. Both of them have good amounts of forest on the western edges of the district, but they also have a beautiful beaches and some offshore islands also. So there's a good mix of habitats shared by these two districts. If you go even further than the Toledo district, then you hit Guatemala. There's actually some ways of getting from Belize, from southern Belize into Honduras and into Guatemala. A lot of people tend to use those areas. But let's talk about some of the reserves in these two districts and what we can find. This is the Hopkins wetland, a very good area to look for many of the herons and egrets. We come looking for clapper rail in this area as well, because among the mangroves, along the grasses, the edge of this wetland, we tend to see them. We even find reddish egret here sometimes. We even find jabiru storks in this area. So really good mixture of bird life in this area. If you look towards the back, those are some of the hills leading up into the Coxcomb Basin and the rest of the Maya Mountains. So it starts from the low areas, the coastal areas, and it goes all the way up into the mountains. This is a view from near Bladen, and this is where the lower elevation forest starts giving way to higher elevation on the Maya Mountains. So this is the area where you would be looking for stuff like great patu, scarlet macaws are frequent around here, and some of the larger raptors also that we mentioned. Bladen is one of the only places that we know of in Belize where you can still occasionally see harpy eagles, but it's hard. There are no guarantees that you will see a harpy eagle here, but occasionally somebody has a sighting and they publish a photo. So some of the birds that we see around here, in the lower areas, red leg honey creeper is very common, pretty much throughout Belize, but quite common in the southern part. White-colored manakin, in the coastal areas like the Hopkins wetlands that I mentioned, mangrove cuckoo, you can find that around there. Some of those coastal mangroves are really, really good for this species, for the mangrove cuckoo. So when we're looking for that species, we head to the coastal areas and the mangroves. I also mentioned the harpy eagle. It's a possibility, although it's slim, but it's down in the southern forests of Belize. Spot-breasted oriole, which were brought in by one of the hurricanes into Belize. We did not have them too long ago, but they were blown in by one of the hurricanes. Now they have an established population in not just Toledo, but also in Stan Creek now. So they're slowly expanding their range. And that's our famous clapper rail that I mentioned. This was a photo taken right at Hopkins wetland. When they're walking around the mangroves, going from one section to the other, they do come across open areas and they offer good opportunities for photography right there. Few others, like the white-necked Jacobin, a rather common species of hummingbird. And then we have the black-crowned antshrike. Once you start seeing black-crowned antshrike in Belize, you understand that the rainfall is higher. We start seeing black-crowned antshrike in areas with over 100 inches of rain a year. You know that's real rainforest. And then, of course, the crimson-colored tanager, the one on the lower right, becomes quite abundant in the forest of southern Belize. And of course, we don't want to just skip the islands. We have well over 100 islands, bigger islands here in Belize, and they offer good opportunities for a number of species out there when we visit. We have, for example, in most coastal areas and most islands that have mangrove, we have the subspecies of yellow warbler, which we call the mangrove warbler. And then below that, you see roseate terns, which have nested on some of the islands here in Belize. And on the right, you have the rufous-necked wood-rail. Beautiful wood-rail. If you go, for example, to Peacocker or to some of the coastal areas around Belize City, in the mangroves, they're looking for food. So a beautiful wood-rail. Not the easiest to see, but if you know where to look for it in coastal areas, you can come across it. And I want to give thanks to all the people who have helped with providing some photographs. Some of these are local photographers like Isaias Morataya, Francis Canto, Eduardo. These are all really good birders who are constantly out in the field getting some good photographs for us to share. And of course, our partners like Belize Audubon and Tony Roth also, who has shared some images for us to use.